Gladiators are one of the first things that you think about when you think about Roman history. They were almost as famous as Rome's soldiers themselves. These warriors fought in arenas for the entertainment of the crowds, and at one point they almost caused the city of Rome to collapse in 70 BC. But that story is for a different time. An ancient writer named Livy said that the Romans got the idea of gladiatorial fights from the Companions, a nearby Italian group, just before the Big Punic Wars. Some think it might have started even earlier with the Etruscans, who also gave Rome some of its first kings. By the time of the late Roman Republic, gladiatorial games were a regular thing, especially as politicians like Julius Caesar used them to get on the good side of the common people, known as the plebeians. The Senate was so worried about the influence of these games that they included rules about them in their anti-corruption laws of 62 and 65 BC. But even that did not stop the crowd's thirst for blood. Special schools called ludi popped up to train these fighters, and one of the most famous was in Capua. A respected Roman historian named Tacitus came up with the phrase bread and circus to describe how Roman emperors kept their power, by keeping people fed and entertained. Free gladiatorial fights were a big part of that. These fighters represented Roman values like bravery in battle, and big games often happened after successful military campaigns. One emperor, Trajan, held 123 days of non-stop games in the Colosseum, with 10,000 fighters involved over that time. Gladiators were slaves. They were either born into it, captured in war, or punished for crimes like piracy. Free citizens could lose their citizenship if they were criminals, and they could be forced into slavery. However, some gladiators became such celebrities and made so much money that it was tempting for some free Roman citizens to give up their citizenship in order to join the arena. The word arena comes from the Latin word for sand, which was used to soak up the blood. Gladiators were like the rock stars of their day, and according to the poet Ovid, wealthy women even paid to spend a night with the gladiator. They were the gigolos of their day. Now, there were different types of gladiators, and people had their favourites. Just like kids today have their favourite football players, back then they would have had their favourite gladiators. Each type of gladiator had its own particular style, weapons and armour, which kept the fights exciting. The names of these gladiators often came from Rome's old enemies. Now, here are some of the most common types. The Murmillo is the type of classic gladiator. Armed with a short sword and a big shield, they were the closest to Rome's soldiers and had a very distinctive helmet. They usually fought against Greek-style fighters. Now, when you watch the movie Gladiator, this is the image that you see, a Murmillo. The second type is the Hoplomachus, which was named after the Greek hoplite warriors. These gladiators used spears and a round shield. Now, to make the fights harder, they didn't wear shoes, and their spears were shorter, which meant that they had to get closer, which was more action for the crowd. The third type was a Retiarius. Now, this gladiator fought with a net, a trident, and a dagger. They wore light armour and relied on speed to wear down their heavier opponents. Some ancient writers thought that they were too delicate and looked down upon them. They were considered quite effeminate. Now, when I watched the movie Gladiator, I've always wondered, like, what are these guys with the net? It just doesn't look right. So these would not have had the respect of the other type of gladiators. Now, the last type that we're going to talk about is the Phraics. Now, this was inspired by warriors from the Balkans, like the Thracians, such as Spartacus, These gladiators used short swords and shields. They were well balanced fighters and often targeted their opponent's back with a curved sword. The Freyax was what you would start as, so when you first became a gladiator and you went to the Ludi, the school, you were taught to fight as a Freyax before specialising in one of the other 3 fields. Gladiator games were ridiculously popular, especially with the lower classes, and this is shown by the artwork found in places like Pompeii. Some emperors like Claudius and Commodus were really into these games, while others, and Commodus for example was too into the games. He actually tried to become a gladiator himself. He used fixed fights, but he still tried to become a gladiator. Now, while other emperors tried to tone them down because they worried about the impact on society, for example, Augustus and his successor Tiberius tried to stop rich people from attending the gladiatorial games. Some writers, like Silius Italicus and Ovid, didn't like the games. Silius thought they were just pointless bloodshed, whilst Ovid worried that the arena was causing a moral decay. He also mentioned that Augustus made sure women sat far from the action to avoid them getting too excited. Stoic philosophers like Seneca and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius admired how gladiators faced death with courage and honour. Sometimes if a gladiator survived long enough, they could earn their freedom, symbolised by a wooden sword called a rudus. Freed gladiators who chose to keep fighting were especially respected. This is like when a boxer retires and then comes out of retirement for one last fight, and he gets a lot of respect for it. Gladiator games started to fade out in the 3rd century AD when female gladiators were banned. Economic problems in the 3rd century crisis also made the games less common because they simply could not afford to keep having these lavish games. Later Christian emperors in the 4th century further reduced the games. Emperor Constantine stopped sending criminals to the arena because he was a Christian himself, and Christians were not allowed to fight. In 395 AD, Emperor Theodosius made Christianity the official state religion, which led to the end of public pagan festivals, including gladiatorial games. But it wasn't until his son Honorius passed laws in 399 and 407 AD that the last of the gladiatorial games was shut down in the western part of the empire. In the Byzantine Empire in the east, which continued on long after Rome, chariot races and theatre shows took over as the main form of entertainment. Thank you for watching this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe and a comment, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.